All right. So yeah, this kind of impromptu. And I think we kind of started this off just by, I think yesterday, Luke and I were talking about social and games and everything, and what we can do to make Koinos more accessible to people, and what kind of new paradigm shift can we do? And the question started coming out there. Hey, what would you think about social on Koinos? How would this look like? And obviously, you guys, Koinos Group, were the former creators of Steemit, which is one of the most, and probably still is, most used decentralized blockchain-based social media applications. I kind of want to start the conversation there. What would social look like on Koinos? Have you thought about that? I mean, Open Orchard was this company that you guys thought about, and we've gone a long way from that.
Yeah, there's definitely some interesting Koinos backstory there, and part of the reason why I thought it would be fun to have this impromptu chat is because a lot of people are learning about Koinos now, and I think for a lot of people it's kind of coming out of nowhere, and they're probably pretty curious about where we've been, who are we, how did we manage to create something so unique and so with such great features, um, and and I think understanding the backstory will be really helpful to those people because yeah, I really do think that a lot of people, it's going to be like, whoa, where did you guys come from? And I think a lot of it comes back to the unique insights that we gained when developing Steam. And people who've been in Koinos for a long time, they know about this. People like you know the crazy backstory. But we're not like a group of people who are like, we know how to build blockchain better because we took a software engineering course and worked
Right.
at a big tech company for a couple of years. We were working on the the first social blockchain for 4 years, and then and that really molded us, and that chain was hostily taken over, and that had a huge impact on us. And coming out of that hostile takeover, right, where Steam kind of turned into Hive, and Hive is still operating and has a bunch of social apps. Coming out of that, we were like, well, we've learned all of this stuff about Steam, and we've learned all these, um, how much developers loved Steam and what developers loved about Steam, right? Which was mainly these feeless transactions, and the user experiences that were made possible because of those feeless transactions. But then all the other stuff that came along with that, that kind of degraded the scalability and the usability of that blockchain, lack of smart contracts, costly accounts, things like that. And so coming out of that takeover, we were very much still in that social media mindset, that social application mindset, and we were asking ourselves, okay, what's the next generation of this? um, Hive is great. It's on it, it's community run, um, and it's stable. um, but what are they going to need in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years from now that the architecture that they're working with isn't going to be able to support? And that's kind of where the brainstorming started. Was okay. Well, and then the other thing we're looking at is Splinterlands, and how Splinterlands is the biggest game there. And this is 3 years ago now. It's still the biggest thing there. It's still using 97% of the Hive blockchain, right? So we're saying, okay, what were the problems on the social side, and what were the problems on the gaming side, that are making this less than ideal for Splinterlands? And so all along we're thinking, how are we what is the next generation of decentralized social going to need? What kind of blockchain is it going to need? And in fact, we were starting from the social application. Um, that was kind of where things started for us. Um, and ultimately, we got to a place where we realized we needed a new blockchain for this thing. Um, and then we got to a place where we realized that the same blockchain that was needed to create next generation social applications that could scale to the masses was the exact same blockchain we felt was needed to scale any decentralized application to the masses. Um, Whether it was DeFi or whatever other kind of application you can imagine, because it was all about free to use smart contracts, realizing that the same thing that was needed to unblock Splinterlands and decentralized social and DeFi from external growth was free to use smart contracts. So eventually we realized the the potential impact of that thing, the free to use smart contract, and realized that the thing we needed to focus on most was building a platform for free to use smart contracts. And so we ultimately, we, and part of that meant not being application developers, not tailoring that to a social application, because
Right.
then that would negatively impact non-social applications. But all throughout that process, never once did we make a decision where we thought, well, this will make social applications worse, but it'll make DeFi better. Not at all. All of these decisions benefit both equally. But I think, since we don't work on dApps and we aren't working on a social application, it's important to talk about this because we think that social applications will be very important for Koinos going forward.
I think, for anyone who's not familiar with Steemit, the best experience that came from it, and I know that you didn't begin your Steemit journey by working at Steemit. You were just another user. You found it yourself. But you were able to just basically get a human readable name account and then begin to post immediately to the blockchain. So I think the novelty of it was really, really accessible to begin with. Like you said, the problem was that you couldn't do much on Steemit except for post and repost and like things. And so you're very, very limited to the applications or the functions that you can do. The problem was that it lacked smart contracts. And I think there was a push for Steemit team to really provide some type of functionality that mimics smart contracts, which is what the original SMT or smart media tokens were trying to aim to do. But over time, Splinterland themselves, they found a way to make it work, and they're the dominant player in that ecosystem. And today, they're still a dominant player in that ecosystem. And by opening up the capability of getting people into blockchain with Steemit, you're also opening it up to other people if you provide smart contracts. I think that's what Koinos really is about. It's really the concepts of Steemit reapplied, reimagined, but open to not just an application where you can post and repost and talk to people, but also anything you can really imagine, because smart contracts allow you to do that. But with this new age of social on Koinos, it sort of means that you can do anything you want, because all functionality could just be reprogrammed to another smart contract, isn't it? You would not be limited to just Steemit. You could literally rebuild Steemit. Not saying that you should, but you could really literally rebuild Steemit on Koinos and then add as many features you want, and allow anybody to add features as that idea of a protocol, a social protocol, builds over many people's ideas.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Though I do hesitate to even think in terms of Steemit um, and replicating the features. Absolutely, you can replicate whatever feature you can imagine within a smart contract, and that's upgradable by you. Whereas when we had features implemented on Steam, those were hard coded into the blockchain and required a hard fork to change. But I think the better way to for people who are new to Koinos, to think about Koinos is not as an attempt to improve upon Steam. It's it's more like we spent 4 years training underwater, uh, learning how to build blockchains. Um, uh, and we took that unparalleled experience and knowledge and used it to build a next generation smart contracts platform, because we came to understand that it's all about smart contracts, decentralized apps of all kinds. At the end of the day, it's about smart contracts and building, and we wanted to build the best smart contracting platform possible, and the most generalizable blockchain possible. So we wanted to enable free to use decentralized applications. Now, when we look back at Steam and Hive, what we see is that a lot of the problems that they struggled with get solved when you have a free to use smart contracts platform. But then when you look at Uniswap and CryptoKitties and any other application, you see that those things get solved too. And part of the reason why I'm harping on this point is because I don't think that the ideal social application for Koinos will necessarily look anything like Steem. And this is the problem with application specific blockchains. You
Right.
have to make all of these assumptions up front
Yeah.
and design the blockchain around that. And so this is a problem with DSO, which used to be BitClout. It's a very limited, specific blockchain, where you, as the developer, are highly constrained in how you can use this thing and what you can do with this thing. And what are you getting for that? Whereas with Koinos, you have no constraints and you have very little risk and very little cost for adopting Koinos. So, like, what have you got to lose, right?
That's an interesting point you make, because let's say that you're trying to build a social on Koinos, right? There's a huge advantage on just building a social media application. Let's just say that it is a clone of Steemit. Again, probably not the best idea. We actually know it's a really bad idea, but you could prototype something on Koinos because the backend infrastructure is already decentralized. The backend infrastructure already gives you capabilities of resources, which is the WASM virtual machine. And so by deploying a smart contract there, you could actually prototype your system relatively quickly. You can get your network or whatever application you want to design onto the blockchain and say, hey, this is the idea, this is how people interface with it. And over time, you can move it off chain. You can leave some parts on chain. And I think one of the great things about Koinos is that anybody could actually MVP their product with as minimal infrastructure as possible, because the Koinos infrastructure is already there for you.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point that's very much underappreciated. And I actually think it applies to applications other than social too.
Mm-hmm.
And the point that you're making is quite simple, but quite powerful. When you're building an application, building the infrastructure and making it robust is a significant amount of work. And it's technical work, it's hard work.
Yep.
But when you implement application logic as a smart contract, what you get for free is all the infrastructure that smart contract is running on. That smart contract runs. It runs on the Koinos network. It runs on the Ethereum network, right? So when you write a smart contract for Ethereum, you also get that free infrastructure. Well, except on Ethereum, it's not free.
Right.
So it's actually more expensive, and you have to deal with all of the gas. When you make a blockchain free to use, it kind of flips the equation. And people, I feel like people, actually, let me give you credit, because you brought this to my attention and it kind of blew my mind. So I have definitely never seen anyone else mention it. I never really thought about it myself, but yeah, absolutely. Um, you can totally launch an app quickly, have it running on decentralized infrastructure, and the initial reaction an engineer might have to that is something like, this is the most inefficient way to run this app. This code does not need to be on the blockchain. And they're probably right. But if it's not costing you anything and it's cutting down on your development time, absolutely there are going to be scenarios where it's like, yeah, just use the blockchain for that, for now, as you bootstrap
Yeah.
when your app is small.
That bootstrap issue is also pretty interesting of a problem, because if you decide to launch on a blockchain, right, you actually end up getting all these raw components. So for example, let's just use Ethereum because a lot of people know about that already. If you launch on Ethereum, same benefits, right? You have a smart contract, you have all this backend infrastructure already built for you, it's already decentralized. You have access to anyone who has an Ethereum wallet, you have access to anyone who has ENS, you have access to DeFi, Uniswap. You can all integrate that into your package. However, the problem is that as you start chaining these features together, the gas fee starts adding up. And so if you want to have a platform that leverages DeFi, well, then you're going to have to route through a couple of different pools, and maybe you end up paying a pretty high gas fee, which is why gas fees are pretty high sometimes. But if you do it on Koinos, all of a sudden we have the exact same infrastructure. Instead of ENS, we have something like Koinos account protocol or nicknames. Instead of Uniswap, we have something like CoinDX or CoinCity. We have collections, which is an NFT thing. You get all of that infrastructure upfront, ready to go. You didn't have to code anything. All you have to do is just have access to the base user, the core of users, which are going to be people who have Koinos wallets. And so now, how do you 10x that? And that's the key to everything, right? If you want to build a business, you have to figure out where you can 10x in different areas. So you've already 10x by working on Koinos. You can also 10x again by giving your users free access to your application. And then by doing that, you're now chaining everything together and you're creating a network of network effects. People in CAP are doing their thing. People in collection and CoinDX are all doing their thing. Maybe someone launches a social application. And now next thing you know it, your social application has all these features built in. And again, it doesn't cost anybody anything. And you launch it pretty quickly because you put it on chain.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are two important concepts that you um, brought up that I want to highlight. Especially for those people who are new to Koinos and who are trying to understand, what value it adds. There's the concept of the FAT protocol, and then there's the concept of composability, right? So the value of an Ethereum, of a Solana, is that they are FAT protocols. They accumulate users and developers, which then become available as a resource to everybody else on the platform. And so it just accrues value over time. The longer it exists, the more it grows, the more valuable it becomes, the more reason there is to join. And this is how you get to network effects. And so and then the other thing is composability. And that's kind of related because with fat protocols, you have smart contracts being added, little snippets of open source code that can then be used by other people and repurposed and combined or composed into new applications. And so the more the platform grows, the more applications exist, the more you can pick and choose these smart contracts and use them for your own purposes. Now, what does that have to do with Koinos? Well, if the value of protocol is a function of its size, of how many developers it accrues, of how many users it accrues, then the question is, how do you grow as fast as possible? And that's where the free to use design of it actually becomes really critical, because that was one of the challenges we were trying to solve. We want to accelerate blockchain adoption. We want to onboard mainstream users. How do we grow as quickly as we can? Remove barriers to entry, make it free to use. As far related to composability, TypeScript smart contracts, the multi-language support, which has already led to the TypeScript smart contracts. Developers need to actually be able to write code for this thing. And yes, Ethereum has a very mature ecosystem, tons of great smart contracts, tons of great tools, but Solidity is still a barrier to entry, uh, especially for developers who are just new to blockchain development. And so by opening smart contract development to JavaScript developers, this is another way that Koinos becomes much more accessible, much more capable of growing and taking it back to social applications. What kind of developer builds social applications? One of the big problems that we saw on the Steam blockchain is we had tons of developer interest. We had tons of application uh, developers, but they had but working on the blockchain, dealing with the blockchain itself was totally outside the realm of their expertise, because Steam was written in C++, and it was this monolithic code base. Um, but now, because Koinos is designed the way that it is, and the and we have critical system infrastructure written as TypeScript smart contracts. Now, a JavaScript developer can come in, immediately begin coding up a social application on Koinos. They don't have to become a C++ developer. They don't have to become a Solidity. They don't have to learn Solidity. They can immediately get to work. And now they're learning the same tool chain, the same architecture that the very system itself runs on. So you're getting, it's hard to overstate the importance of this. When with Steam, developers and blockchain engineers were totally disconnected, and it led to a ton of problems. The developers didn't even understand the system that they were working on. So they really couldn't participate. They couldn't speak intelligently about how the system should improve. I'm not calling them stupid. I'm saying it wasn't set up for that.
Right.
And so all of the responsibility and the work fell on the shoulders of Steemit Inc., which was totally overwhelmed by all of the work. Now, switch over to Koinos and look at how much of the work wasn't even done by the creators of the smart contract. Koinos account protocol, one of your projects, being a perfect example. We had human readable accounts on Steemit. Who built that? We did, and we built it into the blockchain, and it was a terrible choice, and everyone was stuck for it. On Koinos, we didn't do it. You did it. It's a business. Now there are options. There's you guys, there's nicknames, and each has their different unique value propositions, and every user gets to benefit from all of these decisions. And it's just infinitely better for developers of any application, but certainly a social application, because that's going to be much more JavaScript, Vue.js, front end developers looking to leverage the blockchain for decentralization.
When Steam was around, I mean, here's a good question to ask. There was a lot of different condensers for Steemit. Although the core blockchain itself is running mostly on C++, one of the biggest topics on Steemit itself was how Steemit worked. And there were so many topics on this item and different opinions on it, but ultimately no one really understood the code base. So they couldn't really interpret what was going on. However, there was still a lot of development on top of Steam. There are people who are basically pulling data from the Steam API and trying to build applications on top of it, right? Kind of like there are different Twitter applications before Twitter pulled the plug on it. So how do you think APIs would help developers build things? That wouldn't allow them to actually require to interact directly with the blockchain either.
Well, yeah, I mean, most developers are going to use APIs. Let me answer the question from a slightly different angle. What people would do is they would look at steemit.com and they would see how antiquated it was and how slow it was to improve. And so they would fork. Condenser
Yep.
is just the name for steemit.com,
The
for
front end.
the front end of steemit.com. And so they would go, these guys suck. They can't update this thing. I'm going to fork this, and it's just a front end. So I'm going to change it. I'm going to make it better. And then what they would find is that behind that front end was a hornet's nest that was ultimately connected to a blockchain. And it's connected through an API. So, I don't think that's really the issue, but like upvotes, right? Upvotes. It's a simple user interface element. But on Steemit, the upvote was done on chain, right? So here's the critical thing that you have to take into account with what you said about rapidly iterating on the blockchain, because that could come back to bite you if you don't do it properly. With Steem, everything was done on chain because it was easier for the architects of Steem to implement everything on chain first, because for the reasons that we outlined. If we're building a blockchain anyway, we might as well use the same infrastructure. Fast forward a year, 2 years, and you've built middleware and front end software, all of which is now assuming that all of this information is coming from a blockchain. It's all optimized to read and write to a blockchain. And so we became a victim of that early decision. So when you fork Condenser, and it's all piping into an API, which is piping into a blockchain, you take on all of that technical debt. And what you saw with all of these clones is that they improved just as slowly, if not more slowly, than Steemit.com did. But the underlying cause for that was that all of this code, for all of this application code, was running inside of a blockchain. And a blockchain that you do not have control over as a developer. That was the problem. The API is not the problem. There's always an API in front of the blockchain, and you're always using it, whether you run the blockchain node locally or whether you use somebody else's node. So the key thing that Koinos changes is now, yes, you have application code running on the blockchain, but you can upgrade it whenever you want. You can write it in TypeScript. You can write it in C++ if you want. Nobody does, right? But you can write it in TypeScript, and you can upgrade it whenever you want. Nobody else is in control of your application code, and that's just a fundamentally huge shift. So, you have a piece of code running on the blockchain and you want to take it off chain, whatever, shut down the smart contract, spin up a microservice, right? You have so much more freedom with how your application can evolve. Like we always say, Koinos is built to evolve. Koinos is all about evolving, being agile, enabling developers to be agile. And Steem was not designed that way. Application specific blockchains, most blockchains other than Koinos are not designed that way. And, again, for any people new to Koinos who are trying to understand what unique value it brings to the marketplace beyond the free to use smart contracts, beyond proof of burn consensus, it's this upgradability. It's this ability to evolve, which enables Koinos to improve at a far more rapid rate than any other blockchain in existence. We said it was going to do that 3 years ago. I think we're starting to see that ramp of progress as more applications like CAP come online, CoinDX collection. We're really starting to see the ecosystem ramp.
I really think that we could see a a really big push because we have this kind of like baseline infrastructure. We've got the ability to trade tokens now, and it's only improving. CoinDX released an SDK where if you had some type of application, you can connect right into their pools and have a trading interface without going to CoinDX.com. Um, Julian's working on smart wallets, in fact, and that's where nicknames I think was kind of born from. Um, and we've got the way to launch pools with Coin City now. And I think there's already 2 projects on there that's launching where you can be anonymous, launch a token on there, and try to find buyers. And you can also have, I think, these vaults where you can lock it for a certain amount of time as well. But over time, I think one of the killer things, the 2 biggest things we're going to see from Koinos is social and games. There's such a good, powerful technology behind Koinos that allows you to capture users who don't have tokens, and that's kind of been the entire mission all along, right? To bring in people from the outside ecosystem in. And I think with the ability to do that, we're going to see games and social proliferate. Now, when it comes to games, it's a little bit of a different story because games are kind of isolated blocks, and it can all be different games, and you're likely not going to see them all interrelate with each other. Just individual games with the ability to use NFTs as assets or something like that. With social, maybe we can have 2 or more social applications on Koinos, but I certainly think that if we had a social application, it would allow people to at least experience blockchain all over again. And I think when it came to Steam, there was a massive, massive blow up on usership because people were able to sign up for free. Of course, what you said before was that Steam ultimately became a victim of its own success and it spiraled out of control at that point, right? With any application that's like social built on Koinos, maybe you can prototype it really quickly by allowing people to post on content on chain, but you would have to move it off chain quickly. However, you would still get the components of the user base, the access to users who have CAP or nicknames, the access to an SDK that CoinDX put out. And, one of the best examples of this, I think, is Nostr. It's the clone of Twitter that Jack Dorsey put out himself. And he was really attempting to build a social network that was decentralized. However, it wasn't a blockchain. And so many of the same concepts appeared where you have people who run clients, which are nodes, information is relayed from different networks, and you had to create an account, and you were given this Nostr account, which is a very incomprehensible name. However, you could buy a name and you can pay for it in Bitcoin, and you can send people tips in Bitcoin. And so it's kind of like a decentralized social network that should have been built on a blockchain because it has a lot of features that it could benefit from if it had access to smart contracts, if it had access to tokenization and all the and basically a user name system like CAP or nicknames. But I think that we probably would see a social network come out pretty soon if someone isn't already working on it. It's got to be in the works, and I think Koinos Group is not working on any application, so it's fundamentally up to the community to develop these things, and it could create a great business for them too.
Yeah, well, one of the patterns that I noticed at my time at Steemit is anytime people were spinning up custom blockchains, application specific blockchains, or building decentralized solutions without a blockchain, they're always trying to get around fees. It wasn't, we need to do this because it's the technically appropriate path. It was always, we want decentralization and we don't want fees. And so we were like, well, if we build a general purpose blockchain that doesn't have fees, there will be literally no reason to either spin up an application specific blockchain or to come up with some complex decentralized solution that isn't a blockchain. Because what we always saw when we looked at those things, like Nostr, like you're talking about, is that what those teams were struggling to find was a blockchain.
Yeah.
Right? They're like
Primitive.
they're like they're doing all this work contorting themselves, trying to figure out how to decentralize this thing when that problem has already been solved. The blockchain database structure is the best, most efficient database for decentralizing software. Um, and it can be made to scale. So why are you avoiding it? And it was because they didn't know what we knew, that this could be made to work. As far as social and gaming, I believe that, let's see, as far as gaming goes, I believe that there's $1 billion opportunity in building a gaming platform on Koinos where you serve up all of the gaming primitives that are necessary for a game to use, so that a game can just come in and say, I want to take advantage of blockchain. I have all of these needs. I want to launch NFTs. I want to launch in-game currencies, blah, blah, blah. I want to release skins and monetize those as tokens. I don't want to reinvent the wheel. I don't want to do all this work myself. I just want my game to work. Right. So there's $1 billion business in just building out that platform. And if that platform exists, I mean, I think that platform will one day exist. And I do think that there will be hundreds, thousands, who knows how many games that do share that platform. And so that would enable you to take your rights, your assets, and maybe move them from game to game. That's the way to do it. You can build games that are totally separate islands from one another. I'm sure there will be those too. But then you don't necessarily get to benefit from the fatness of the underlying protocol. So there will be both, and there will probably be very many games. As far as social goes, it's kind of analogous. I think that there will be hundreds, thousands, who knows how many social applications there will be. How many social applications are there on the internet? You probably can't count them. I think there will be very many, very, very many. And there should be a similar kind of underlying product, which is a shared database of social information. And now we're kind of coming full circle to the conversation, because that was basically the original idea behind OpenLink, the application that we were building. Is let's build a shared database of social information, of usernames, of human readable content, of reputation, right, that's served up to applications. So now an application developer can say, I want to build a social application with this unique value proposition. Give me everything else so that I don't need to build that. And so, if you have these pieces in place, and all of these are money-making opportunities, we're talking billion-dollar opportunities over the course of the next 5-10 years. You can build massive businesses on top of this stuff. It's all a question of, like my friend John Rice, the creator of the Koinos Federation, likes to say, it's all about who is willing to bell the cat, who is willing to step up and say, yes, building this thing may be hard, it may be time consuming, but I'm going to do it. And I'm adding that it's not just belling the cat here, because these are billion-dollar opportunities. Or maybe billion-dollar is not the right way to approach it. Maybe it's better to think of these as million-dollar opportunities. Many, many million-dollar opportunities, right? A social media product that serves up these social primitives, that is already integrated into Koinos, so that application developers can come in and rapidly spin up new applications, maybe you just make millions of dollars a year on that, or a million, right? There's so many of these opportunities for solo entrepreneurs or very small teams. Look at CoinDX. They have 2 people on their team. Look at Collection, right? Very, very small teams. That's part of the benefit of a decentralized protocol. It's not just censorship resistance. It's that shared infrastructure, that composability, that fatness that enables a very small team to spin something up extremely valuable, extremely quickly. And we're talking thousands and thousands of people could be making millions of dollars a year on apps that are running on Koinos.
I think on from a protocol level, right? When you talk about games, it was funny how you said that we're gonna have thousands and thousands of games, and they all may be sharing some underlying infrastructure. And like, if I had to give a more specific example, assume that there's some NFTs that exist out there, and someone who is not involved with NFT at all could create their game and leverage that NFT in their game. And so we can also see is in social, where if you had many, many different types of social applications together, if any one of them could build on top of the previous one, which is composability, and use that existing content, the user base, perhaps reputation, or any of those things, they could literally just work together to build something without having to actually interact with each other. And what you're going to end up seeing is that a protocol gets formed almost by accident, not intentfully. Maybe there's some coordination involved where people want to make sure there's a standard and it's understandable, and so it makes it easy for other people to program. But certainly, if there were many applications that were just building on top of each other, you would naturally get a protocol and small little improvements here and there. And over time, that would actually end up being social. That would be a literal decentralized social network. Whereas, I looked into Nostr quite a bit in the last couple of days, and they struggled so hard to get people to actually run and build a network, right? They wanted people to run clients so that people could connect to them and use the social application. But basically, that's the decentralized part of blockchain without the blockchain. And it's really hard to get people or incentivize them to do so, and it's why you see a lot of the network being completely done out of what's the phrase for doing free?
Charity.
Basically, it's charity work, and they ask for donations. And then some of these relays, what ended up happening is that some of these relays have actually closed off access and said that if you want to connect to our relay, you're going to have to pay some kind of fee to access it. And one of the great things about blockchain is that it gives you this native infrastructure. Everything's done for you. It's decentralized for you from the get-go. All you have to do is plug into it. So you certainly see that social and games, especially things that are very, very widely used in society, to just basically be able to plug in, access users, access digital assets, access tokenization, smart contracts, prototyping, and all these great features that blockchains natively give you for anything that needs to be decentralized. 2 biggest one, obviously, in my mind, is going to be social and NFTs and games.
Yeah. Well, I don't. This isn't necessarily related to where you ended up, but I think it's important to note that the first largest challenge that a developer faces is user acquisition. Just getting those first users. That is
And it's
the
the biggest
hardest
barrier
part.
to blockchain. In fact, any application out there, their biggest challenge is to get people onto
That's what
blockchain.
I'm saying.
Forget
It
about
doesn't
the app.
matter where you are. Any application, the hardest part is getting users. So by providing users, you're already adding tremendous value to applications. The second biggest challenge is growing your user base, getting new users. If you have fees, if people have to pay to use your application, you're making a practically impossible task, growth, actually impossible, right? So part of what Koinos brings here is this turnkey user base, the ability to solve these problems that all developers face, and help them grow faster and forget the blockchain stuff, right? The blockchain adds value, but you don't even need to use it for that if you don't want to. And that's how you achieve mainstream adoption, is by giving people tools that make their lives better, full stop. Right? You don't get to bank on everybody deciding that they love blockchain. You don't get
Right.
to, that's not why the internet won. It's not because everybody made a rational decision to adopt the internet. It's because the internet just added value and it didn't introduce friction and make their lives worse. So that's the key to all of this, is how at every step of the way do we make developers' lives better and users' lives better. And we don't say to them, you have to accept this compromise. It needs to be all upside. And
I
Koinos was designed that way, with that ideology from the beginning. We were very adamant. That was internally me, myself in particular, pushing. This has to be all upside, all upside. We can't compromise and say, well, this sucks, but we'll just have to ask them to take it on the chin. You can do that at the beginning. You can say this sucks for now, but we can make it better. We can obfuscate this, right? This is because it's new, but you have to. That's temporary, right? Like, for example, the Koinos tooling is less mature than Ethereum. Like, yes, you want to build decentralized applications, you have experience on Ethereum, boom, you can go much faster on Ethereum. But that is temporary.
with social, I keep going back to that because
No,
um,
it's good. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
um, correct me if I'm wrong here, but there's no real point in putting majority of content on chain, right? We have to pull data off chain.
The point that I want to make about social, I meant to say this earlier. I'll try to make this a short one. Is yes, we've got all of these blockchain typical applications now. That's great. One of the things we learned with Steam is that it's really the financial stuff that ultimately belongs on chain. This is the highest value stuff. It's what benefits the most from decentralization and censorship resistance. But the thing that Steam did right is that it offered an application that anyone could appreciate, that anyone could use, that isn't all about the technology it's built on. And I do think that that's kind of the last major missing piece for Koinos, is we need to be able to walk up to a random person on the street and say, you should check out this app because I think you're going to love it. And that's where I think social and gaming comes into play, is that it's not that it's the highest and best use for a blockchain. That's exactly the reason. It's not the highest and best use of the blockchain, but it's a use case that can benefit from the blockchain, but also resonate very deeply with any random person on the street, because the best technology in the world is worthless if it's not in everybody's hands, if it's not helping ordinary people. And so to me, that's where social comes into play. And that's why there's still very much room here for social. And, people might think, well, social is played out. There's a million people trying to do this because Twitter, is now
Dominate big
Elon
tech
Musk,
already.
whatever. But the way I view that is the fact that so many people are still trying to do this and they haven't cracked that nut yet just shows that there's still an opportunity there. And at the end of the day, if a social application on Koinos brings in 100,000 users next year, 1 million users the year after that, that's still great. That's still great growth. That's still that many people who weren't getting exposed to blockchain technology who now are. And it's still great for Koinos. Not we're leaving this era where you have to have billions of users before you can make any money or have a really good application. That's the past. The future, in my opinion, is actually many small applications with far fewer users that is generating revenue far more efficiently, not through advertising but through direct monetization thanks to digital assets.
The reason why I think everyone is continuing to attempt social continuously over and over again is because they still see that there's something wrong with modern social. And what's not apparent to users, because they've done such a good job of obfuscating it, removing this completely from your eye, is the fact that all infrastructure in social is currently paid for by your attention. The mere fact that you use it is the cost of supporting the equipment, supporting the hardware, and they make it free so that you can continue to use it, so that they can use your data behind it. And I think the attempt right now for all social applications that are trying to move to Web3 is to find out where to extract or remove the value or the disconnect of where the transfer of funds goes from the eyeballs to the advertisers. And what we're really talking about there is ownership of digital identity, ownership of where your attention goes, which in the case is completely digital, where your time goes. And the attempt in Web3 and the fusion of Web3 and social is really to get in between that. And the reason why I think blockchain is so primed to do this is because the best thing that blockchain does, and this is not just Koinos, this is blockchain in general, is the ability to own digital assets, digitally tangible goods. And so if you really want to get in between that, you have to be able to give people the ability to own something that's digital. And that's blockchain's best asset. So I think the attempt to create social on blockchain will probably end up um, squeezing right in between where the dollars occur between the users and current Web 2 big tech companies like Twitter. They're getting right in between where the money flows. And I think your idea of micropayments, your idea of local communities has probably become the most powerful thing in blockchain social, because now you get creators and their followers to operate in smaller communities where there's a direct exchange of money and there's not a third party person getting in between that and siphoning funds out or controlling and manipulating how your information is being shown to people, potentially how you build your community, and or even shutting you out from canceling your account entirely. And I think that battle is still waging right now, and people are probably only now starting to wake up to it because, you know, the content we see online today versus just 5 years ago, it's been readily apparent that it's been manipulated. It's been readily apparent that the tech companies are, Twitter Files is a real example of this, right? It's really apparent that tech companies come out there and they put a wall in between you and the data itself, and that's where the ownership of that data is pretty important. So certainly, the battle for social isn't over because people continuously try to improve it. And I think Koinos blockchain would probably be one of the best tools that you could use to create another version of social. And Nostrs is a really good example of that. If only they're a decentralized social project looking for primitives that are provided from blockchain when they could have just launched on a blockchain itself. It would have been much, much easier and quicker for them to actually gain some type of traction too.
Well, I think that's another case of back then Koinos didn't exist. You launch your application specific blockchain because you don't want to pay fees, and Koinos doesn't exist. Um, Also, it's if your goal is to raise max dollars, not choose the best technology or just deliver the best product. Again, launching your own blockchain can be a good decision. Um, but as far as what you said about social, another way to put it is they're you're the product. They make they make their applications free to use because you're the product, because they're selling you. And by making it free to use, nobody else can compete. So all these other people trying to decentralize, right? What do they always say? Well, it's decentralized, it's more inefficient, it's more expensive, it can't be free to use. But if you're not free to use, you can't compete, because they will always be free to use because you're the product, right? This is the fundamental shift people have to take into account to really understand what's going on here. So if you want to deliver a social application that can actually compete without making the users the product, you need a free to use blockchain. And so, absolutely, Koinos is the best solution to this problem. What other blockchain was built by the developers of a social blockchain to solve all of the problems that the social blockchain had? But then they decided to make it a general purpose blockchain because they saw how valuable it would be to every other decentralized application out there. It's just a very unique moment in time, where this very weird group of people with a very weird background decided to take this challenge on and do it in the craziest way. And we actually did it. Who would have thought? I didn't think our odds were good. That, oh, we're gonna go build a new blockchain. We're gonna make it a layer one. It's gonna be its own thing. I mean, if you had asked me what the odds are we would have gotten here, I wouldn't have answered the question. I would have been like, you know, it's gonna be tough because the
I
odds
mean,
were like 10%.
I mean that's the truth of it, right? I guess if you, I guess you have to be an entrepreneur to really kind of consider going out this route. But you guys have certainly made it super easy for people to launch applications. I'm not a developer, but I work with Luke Willis on Cap, and we were able to launch with the help of Roman to launch Cap, and it certainly seemed to be a lot easier than launching your own blockchain. It certainly was easier to because I mean the
It's
reality is
infinitely easier than launching your own blockchain for
you've
sure.
created such a strong backbone for people to launch applications on that it would be foolish not to launch on Koinos. But at the same time, the hope was with Cap was that it would be foolish of you to try to launch an application and then attach a name service to it, and then attach it to a decentralized application, and then attach that to a blockchain, right? All these things are kind of just built for you, and the building blocks are kind of already there. Now, with that said, um, would you like to see a social application on Koinos?
Yeah, for sure. And I'll tell you why, because I've been thinking about this a lot. Actually, for a number of years, I think everybody in Koinos group was like, I never want to think about a social application ever again. We felt so grateful to be outside of the world of, to have kind of gone the general purpose route and be freed from thinking about applications, and to be focused on thinking about developers and supporting them. It's amazing. Um, but what I've realized is that blockchains are, there's this idea of the network state, by Balaji, who I actually don't like. But it's an interesting idea. Blockchains are their own societies, right? They're their own tribes, they're their own cultures. And we saw this with Steemit, and having that social venue um, was really powerful. It gave people a place to congregate, share ideas, and form a shared identity, on top of the very technology that they believed could empower a better future. Um, Now, the problem with that design was that because we couldn't upgrade it, because there was only one token, it devolved into an echo chamber about Steam. And so this application was this representation of this very limited, very constrained population. Um, with Koinos, we aren't going to have that situation. Um, if you want to launch your own token, you can launch your own token. If you don't want there to be any economics to your social application at all, you can do that too. There doesn't have to be money in your decentralized application. So now you can give many different communities um, a place to congregate on Koinos where the algorithms are transparent and immutable and auditable, right? You can have all kinds of economics, healthy economics, unhealthy economics,
No economic.
that no economics. Coin can be your currency. You can have your own currency, right? And so now you can see a blossoming of all kinds of communities on Koinos, and that's what gets me excited about social on Koinos. It's that it wouldn't. Right now we use Telegram, we use Discord, right? We are looking for a place to congregate, and people look for a place to go when they come in, and we're reliant on all these third-party services that don't leverage the very technology that we think is going to make the world better. And so to me, that's where the importance of social comes in. It's kind of a bridge. It's a bridge between the real world, the social world, humans are social creatures, and the blockchain world. These financial tools that can be tremendously empowering, but if they're disconnected from this other critical component of our nature, I think that's a I think that's a big problem. I think that's a fundamental. I think that will be a limiting factor to adoption and growth. I know it's getting a little philosophical here, but right,
No, not at
but
all.
we are social creatures. So to have this part of our existence over there, I think it doesn't make sense. We have to figure out how to bring that part right when you're talking about a general purpose platform. What you're saying is we can do anything on this thing. We can do anything. So we should do everything.
I would love to see, and it's for the fact of the community, right? The fact that the community is now separated on applications. They're on Telegram, they're on Discord, they're on Twitter, and that's just the Koinos community. In the blockchain community as a whole, they're on, X. They're on their own Telegrams, their own Discords, and there's a really big separation. I think one of the things that I would love to see out of Koinos is a social application with no economics, none whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
But one where people can come and join and create their own communities.
Well, and the interesting thing about that is that with the mana system, you still get spam mitigation.
Yes.
I think that is incredibly cool and important. You have a mechanism for spam mitigation, but it's still free to use. You can still offer this application. Everybody thinks, I feel like I've seen Musk mention it, that the only way that you still need to impose a fee. The only way to fight
Yep.
spam is with a fee. Not true. The mana system will fight spam and remain free to use, and I think that's huge. The other one point I really wanted to make before we close this thing out is that the other reason, maybe the more important reason to see social on Koinos, is to give people ownership. You said it, I think, at the very outset. Is it's not censorship resistance of content, though there are ways to do that too. It's giving people ownership over the very platform that they're using, ownership over that content. So yes, it's free to use. Yes, you get the same user experience, but you're in control. You're the owner. And that's a fundamental shift that's incredibly empowering, and I think incredibly, incredibly important for the world. I think we need to get the world there. It might take 50 years, but why not make it 10 years? What if we can get everybody using social applications where they're in control of their data? Why not? Isn't that better?
I
Is
think
that a better world?
there's a natural inclination to push. And I know we're kind of go over time here, but there's a natural inclination for people to want more ownership over themselves. It's the very basis of freedom, right? The more we realize that we don't have control of ourselves, the more uncomfortable we are, which is why I think a lot of people still love and enjoy this country. But part of it is slipping away because your freedoms are taken away from you slowly, and it's not, it's not a firsthand in your plate taking it out. It's really backdoor. You're not seeing it. You're not seeing it, but you're feeling it. And I think if we bring social to the world via Koinos, we're going to give people the ability to really capture and own aspects of who they are online, to own aspects of the platform, to feel like they're using the platform because they're benefiting themselves and not benefiting someone else. And so I think that's also the hardest thing to do too, because we don't have a model for how this actually works. We don't have an example of how it works, and when we have to pioneer exactly how a social plus Web3 world would look, where the most powerful asset is the blockchain itself, it's the ability to own digital assets and own what you do online, own a part of the platform, and be a voice that actually supports the ecosystem and can grow it through your own communities, or through as a user amplifying a community itself. We're definitely going to see that become the next big social platform. I think it's going to be on Koinos. Not holding any secrets here, but I do believe it's going to be on Koinos because there's just so much potential there. Now, closing thoughts, so we can close this out. Social's going to come to Koinos. Mark my words, it's going to happen. And
Oh,
you're
I
right.
definitely think it's inevitable. There's always just the question of the timeline. Who's going to do it? When are they going to do it? There was a point I wanted to make on your point about freedom and our increasing loss of freedom. Um, People tend to focus on the government and things that are going on there. I would actually suggest that we are losing more freedoms as a result of the growth of these massive tech companies, many of whom do social media, are social media companies, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram.
Google.
They are the new feudal lords.
They are.
They are the new feudal lords. They control the cloud, and they collect rent on everybody who's using the cloud, and they own those clouds. And Koinos is a decentralized cloud. And so moving these things to the decentralized cloud is critical. Focusing on tech companies and especially social media companies absolutely is the right target because they are having so much. They control the means of communication. They control the messages we hear and see. Their importance cannot be overstated, and they are ripe for disruption. They don't make much money, or their margins are very tight. They own, advertising is a terrible business model. It
It's
is
actually a fight to the cheapest. The advertisers are literally trying to find the cheapest way to reach their audience, right? And it's a constant battle to reduce prices to access their user base, which means they're going to sell you out more and more every single day.
exactly, because you are the product, and they got to make more money on you tomorrow than they did yesterday. And they're a corporation who doesn't care about you and is
That's the
maximizing profit for
fundamental.
shareholders.
That's actually the fundamental thing that I think will open people's eyes, because the government is already using social media. Twitter files is a great example. There's going to be Facebook files. There's probably Instagram files.
Well, there are
TikTok.
files. We're not going to see them because
Well,
Elon Musk doesn't own those ones.
it's only because he doesn't have enough money to own them. But the reality is that the government is already using this technology to change the way you see information. Now, forget whether it's false truths or whatever. It's the fact that you no longer know what the truth is. It's the fact that you no longer understand who is telling the truth. Where does this data come from? And I think that's where blockchain, its principal power, comes in hand. It's the ability to own digital assets. And when I say assets, I don't mean tokens, or I don't mean stuff like that. I mean, information itself is an asset, and the means of how you manipulate information is an asset to tech companies. Break that wall down. you bring it back to the people, and you allow people to work in these smaller communities to create their own truths and ideas. And the collection of that is what I think a decentralized social application on blockchain will eventually become. But the first step to that is launching something that has, I think, no economics. So the point of using it really is just to use it as a way to congregate and build communities, and then trying to figure out what the economics are. Again, we don't know what they are. It's the first time we're doing it. Steam it as a social application, it had its problems. It was trying to monetize things in the wrong way. And so slowly we're going to find out what the right answer is. But it all begins with general purpose, free to use. It allows you to change with the times, and change with new information you get over time. Um,
Absolutely. I think that's a great idea. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that Steam made was implementing those economics too early, making them too difficult to change. So no, I'm 100% on board with this idea. I think it's great, and Koinos Group is here to help anyone building any of these applications. And if people have questions, please, subscribe to your favorite channel, whether it's on YouTube or Twitter. Ask questions on Twitter. Maybe we'll do more of these and we can answer questions then. But I really like this format, just talking with you. And as
yeah,
always, it was a great, fun
likewise,
conversation.
likewise. All right, so let's end it there. Thanks for this impromptu thing, and let's try to do more of these. All right,
Thanks everyone for tuning in.
take care. Bye bye.